Hello and welcome to the Football Hipsters podcast. I am your host and chief in command, Kris, and it's back to the interviews as we are in the midst of an international break recording this. We'll just finish one, actually. It is with great pleasure tonight that I bring to you a gentleman I've followed for many years and have long been an admirer of. It is a great pleasure to introduce to yourselves Mr. Andy Brassell. Good evening, Andy.
Good evening, Kris. Thanks for your kind words and thanks for having me on. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's trust me, Andy. It is our pleasure, and I shall refer to you as Andy and withdraw the temptation to call you Top Brass. More on that later. Right, we'll kick off the interview, Andy, just to for some of our listeners who may not be aware of your work. I can't imagine there'll be many, but there might be a few. So, for anyone that is not familiar with you or indeed your work, can you give us a little bit about yourself and your career in football to date?
Well, I kind of stumbled into writing about football, European football, as I still write about in my mid-20s, I suppose. And then from there, I wrote a book on a season in the life of the Champions League, which coincidentally enough happened to be the season where Jose Mourinho won it with Porto. Then I did a radio show. I was lucky enough to do the World Football Phone-In on BBC 5 Live with Dot and Adebayo and the great Tim Vickery for 7 years, I think, 7-8 years, something like that, which is great. Do other radio and telly stuff now whilst still writing a lot. And I just try and, I suppose, keep it fresh, really, to try and not just stick to one country, while there are lots of journalists that I do admire that specialise in one country in particular. Obviously, I have some that I know better than others. So maybe like, say, France and Portugal, where I've spent extensive periods of time. I used to live in France. Perhaps my strongest suits. I like to find stuff out. I think that's really important as a journalist, not to just be on your soapbox saying this is how it is all the time, but to be constantly finding stuff out to know that you don't know everything. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And speaking of your sort of upbringing and you studied, I believe, at doing my research at Newcastle University.
Wow,
English
that
literature
is
and
good.
language. Yeah, I did my research.
Really
I couldn't resist. But English literature and language. So I suppose the obvious question: how did you find yourself in football after studying that?
Well, I think English language and literature is pretty open-ended in that it prepares you for all careers or none, depending on which way you look at it. For me, I suppose it just I don't think doing my degree made me any cleverer, but it did give me an opportunity and put me in a position where I had to read lots of books from different authors and in different situations, and I don't know, it gave me an appreciation of structure, I suppose, and made me think about like how I would organise my own thoughts. Football journalism, it's sort of like back to the source, really, because when I was like about 12 through to about 16, I used to write match reports for the Wimbledon and Merton Informer on Wimbledon, who are my team. And they got published in the local paper. I think my mum and dad always thought I would like become a football journalist. And then I got to about 16 and I thought, you know what, I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to write about it. At that point, I couldn't see how I could make it into something creative, really. Because I always wanted to do something creative. I sort of, at the time, I guess I would pick up 3 or 4 different papers, say with a Wimbledon match report, and I would have a pretty good idea of what was going to be in those reports before I read them. And I thought, well, you know, I don't really want to do that. And I couldn't figure out a way that you could write about football in a more creative way. It took me several years to figure out how that could be done. And I guess maybe that affects now the way I do write. Because I like it to be relatively conversational. I like it to draw in various different threads rather than necessarily be top line and newsy all the time. I like a bit more space to explore stuff. I suppose we all do. And to find a structure, a readable structure in which to do that is more and more of a challenge because, so much football writing is now consumed on mobiles and tablets. So you have to hit that balance, I suppose, between being punchy and sometimes bite-sized and yet trying to go a little subcutaneously at the same time. I think it can be done, but it's a work in progress. But whoever you are, whatever writer you are, whether you just started writing yesterday or whether you've been writing for 30 years, you're always growing, you're always improving. And that's the brilliant thing about it, isn't it? There's no limit to how good you can get or how much you can develop your craft.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Same with podcasting, isn't it? It's very difficult to know how long to do a podcast for, how short, how much you cover on one subject, and it's very, very difficult, especially when you're passionate about something, of course. But it can go on for hours. Speaking of your role, obviously in journalism and working within that sector, how did you find the different roles between sort of being freelance and working directly for a company? Obviously, you've been with ESPN and I believe you worked for UEFA briefly as well. So, I mean, how did you sort of find the two differences? And was there anyone that you saw as an inspiration to help you get to where you are today? Somebody you looked up to, maybe?
There was never really a difference for me. I was always freelance. I always worked for all the people I worked for on a freelance basis. So, in a way, it was a good way to start when I was considering sort of making a go of it. Like I said, I just kind of drifted into it, and at the time, I was temping in offices and stuff. I didn't really have a career plan, or certainly writing about football wasn't a career plan anyway. And I just sort of built up my portfolio, I suppose, for want of a better word. Over a period of time, and then got to a point where that could sustain me. But I don't know. I think I don't think I've ever been asked by anyone I've worked for to go full time, and I don't think it would necessarily suit me as well. I kind of like organising my own workload. I like having different people to work for who want different things from you, so it stretches different parts of your brain. I think that's really important as well. As for someone who inspired me, I don't know. There were a lot of people like I found really helped me and were really generous with their time when I was starting out, when I was putting my book together. People like Phil Ball, great writer on Spanish football for ESPN for many years. He was great to me. Guillaume Balaguer was very good with his time and very, very helpful as well. Sid Lowe. I know these are all Spanish football writers. There were others, and obviously, as you mentioned when we were talking before, Tim Vickery, who I think the thing that Tim does better than anyone. It's not just that he has his niche in Brazil. It's not just that he's intelligent and erudite and empathetic. It's the fact that he understands that football's important and why it's important, but he also understands that it's just a cog in the wheel, and he can put it in a social, historical, moral context in a way that no one else can, and that's what makes him so special, I think.
Yeah, he is fantastic. I know a previous guest of ours, we've spoken to Mina Rizuki before, and she said almost word for word what you just said to me there. She said he's just such an intelligent and well thought man. It's just really, really good to listen to. But we'll save the praise for Tim because it's you we want to find out more. So I have to ask you. I'm much the same as yourself in that I like to watch as much football as I can, probably to the detriment of my social life, I should add. But I watch all sorts of leagues all around the world every week, and I love it. But Can you give the listeners some insight into how many hours you dedicate your craft to? And have you got any sort of fun facts that people wouldn't know about how you gather your information? For example, like, do you have a little black book of notes, or are you constantly sort of taking things down on the phone, that kind of thing? Is any little secrets you can share?
You know what, Chris? I never really write anything down. I'm not big on writing stuff down at all, and that has been a funny thing actually about organising and planning radio shows in the last couple of years, because for the first time I've had to do that, because even if you know what's coming next, the people around you who are working don't necessarily, and they need to. So that's maybe changed a little bit, but yeah, I'm not big on writing things down. To be honest, I sort of rely, for better or worse, on my brain and take it from there. Really, I don't know. I never want to be in the situation where I feel stuff is too rehearsed, and I think like practice is fine, honing your craft's fine, but I want stuff to feel natural and normal as well. Certainly in the context of live radio or television. As for how long I spend watching games, I couldn't even put a figure on it. I don't think I'd want to put a figure on it. It would simultaneously disgust and frighten me, I think. But I try and get through at least, I guess, at least a couple of whole 90 minutes of the major leagues that I keep an eye on every weekend. So that would be France, Portugal, Germany, Spain off the bat, Italy, depending on the week. Then on top of that, there are the biggest games from other leagues. So if it was Dynamo Kiev against Shakhtar, as we're recording now, we've got Fenerbahce versus Galatasaray coming up in a couple of days, and I'll certainly be watching that as it happens. Then of course you have Champions League, Europa League on the top, and with the highlights and what have you, it squeezes out my poor little Wimbledon, really. I don't get the chance to go that often anymore. Of course, I'm often working at the weekends as well, but it's nice actually. It always feels like a real treat when I get to go and watch Wimbledon. And I do feel that when you're talking about watching football on television, of course, it's a valuable thing for this job, and it's an enjoyable thing as well. But it can't. It's a compliment to watching live football. It can't replace it, because when you're, and I've said this before, when you're watching football in a stadium, the context is totally different, and whereas you're trusting the director when you're watching it on television, and the camera is showing you what it thinks is the most important thing to show you. When you're at the game, you're the director. So I remember very vividly, like the first game I went to outside the UK. I went to watch Internazionale play Newcastle with a Newcastle supporting friend in Milan, and of course already knew what a great player Christian Vieri was, but I came out of the stadium that night thinking he was incredible, on another planet, just because I've been able to watch him off the ball, the runs he made, the way he held the ball up. So not necessarily following him when the game was maybe elsewhere, and everything about him. I think you get such a better appreciation of individual players, of tactics, of how teams are organised or not organised, as the case may be, when you go to the game. So I think you need the two sides of it.
Yeah, you've just described my exact thoughts of when I first saw Santi Cazorla in the flesh. Exactly the same emotions. I just sort of walked out going, how does he even do what he does? Just unbelievable. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But and you also sound very similar to me in that I probably watch as much as yourself, so I can comfort myself knowing that somebody who does it for a profession, I can be the same. So I like that. Let's talk about your footballing loves. Can you tell us? Obviously, you mentioned your love for AFC Wimbledon. What a story they have, of course. Any other
Yeah.
teams or particular leagues? I know you're a big fan of Portugal, and any particular players that you've grown to really love or admire over your career.
Well, I lived in Lyon for 2 years, and yeah, I had a season ticket there. Sometimes I went behind the goal, and sometimes I went in the press box, depending. I mean, it was so cheap to get a season ticket behind the goal. It was actually cheaper than getting a season ticket for AFC Wimbledon. Bear in mind at this point that Lyon had won the league 6 years in a row and qualified for the quarterfinals of the Champions League 3 years in a row, whereas Wimbledon were in Ryman League, not Division 1, I think it was Ryman Prem. So it was extraordinary. I suppose that shows football pricing is a particularly English problem, and not necessarily just in the Premier League, but all the way down. But yeah, anyway, I feel a great attachment to Lyon because of that. I was really lucky because the first year that I went regularly was the year that Karim Benzema and Atem Ben Arfa broke into the first team, and it was really terrific watching them come up. For that reason, I've always watched Karim Benzema really closely, and I know he's someone who divides opinion. I'm sure as an Arsenal fan, you've kept a close eye on him as well, because he's
Yeah.
sporadically linked with the move across. But I find him fascinating because he's a player who there's no other striker quite like him, really. The way he intuitively links with other players, the way he can pick a pass as well. He's one of the best finishers I ever saw at Lyon, and I think the thing that's kept him alive for so long at Real Madrid is the fact that he's made Cristiano Ronaldo happy. He feeds him so well, and you wonder how many other strikers there are who can do that. And I know Ronaldo really appreciates him for that very reason, which of course are quite selfish reasons, but of course we all think like that, don't we? We like people around us who make our life easier. So yeah, he's someone I watch really closely. They're a club with a great tradition of producing young players. So there are a lot out of there who are great to watch. Juninho was a big star at the time as well, of course. I was a huge fan of his. In Portugal, it was interesting actually seeing Lisandro Lopez, a player who I admired so much at Porto, subsequently going over to Lyon. And I remember saying to my friends over there, this guy's incredible. And he grew into being a real hero at Lyon as well. I guess going back to Portugal, Rui Costa is just an obvious one. I don't think there's anything particularly cultish about him, but he's a huge favourite. And when I was interviewing him Euro 2008, inadvertently taught me how to swear in Portuguese when a steward grabbed him by the arm and tried to wrestle him out of a doorway, feeling he was a fire hazard.
Super. Rui Costa, a fire hazard. That's a quote if I've ever heard one. Love that. And I love the Juninho Pernambucano, what the man of the free kicks. Just I can still visualise some of those back in the day. What a player he was. And as a fan,
that's the thing, isn't it? He didn't just have one free kick. So whereas David Beckham, for example, had one free kick, and well, it was a really good free kick. Let's not make any bones about it. But Juninho had the up and down shot before Cristiano Ronaldo brought it back later. He had the curler from close in, from further out. He had the one that he could drive all the way along the floor. I remember him scoring one like that against Real Madrid in the Champions League. And I remember he went to a rugby club actually. I think it was Toulouse. I might be wrong. To figure out how their kickers kick the ball, just so he could get some tips on different ways to hit the ball. He was always learning and improving his technique.
Superb, yeah, I love that. Love players who can adapt their skills. Superb stuff. Off the back of that question, do you have an opinion on which league is one to watch in the coming years with regards to progression, expansion, or talent? I mean, we've seen obviously America are making a good fist of it with MLS, although the quality's not there, and other leagues are starting to rise. People are looking at Belgium, at Portugal, as you've mentioned previously. Any other leagues that you think could be on the cusp of joining those big five?
Well, you know what? A few years back, I might have said Turkey because of the money involved. Unfortunately, financing Turkish football has always been quite opaque, and the problem since the Passer League system, which is a really quite detested membership system that you need to. This government imposed that you need in order to buy tickets, has emptied a lot of the stadiums and really negatively impacted the experience for fans. Also, the fact that Turkey don't necessarily have a huge inclination to sell their rights big abroad. Of course, they've got a really big domestic television contract as well. Is something that doesn't really help to spread the word. I think it's still got a few more issues to sort out. I feel that the strength of Portugal is concentrated amongst so few clubs at the top. I don't really see it getting much further than it is now. France is an interesting one because not only do you have Paris Saint-Germain, you have Lyon, who've just moved into this incredible new stadium, and it's got their profits going up a long way already, and they've sold some of their capital to a Chinese company. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes in the future. You've had Marseille being taken over by Frank McCourt. Of course, a lot of LA Dodgers fans are not exactly in love with Frank McCourt and say he left their club in a terrible mess. We'll wait to see what happens with Marseille, but there's enormous potential there. The guy who was going to buy Marseille, Gerard Lopez, the businessman from Luxembourg, he looks like he's going to buy Lille. So, and then you've got Monaco. So there could be a few powers at the top there. And I wonder how the reformatting of the Champions League will affect that. But on a personal level, I find it hard to envisage a point where I will like watching any league more than I like watching La Liga. I just love it. Like on an aesthetic and technical level, as well as the fact that it always contains, certainly in recent years, the best couple of teams in the world. Then you add Atletico into the mix. You've got San Pauli developing things at Sevilla, which is fascinating, and that's an incredible football city. Anyway, I'm sure people who listen to the European Football Show and TalkSport 2 will have heard me rattle on about Seville at some length because it's just an incredible place to watch football. There's always the possibility that Valencia could get their house in order at some point. I wouldn't bet my last euro on it, but you never know. So I don't know. I think the fact that Spain is getting a bit more strength in depth over the last couple of years, that there's a bit more of a title tussle, the fact that the TV money is being spread around a little bit more. I mean, if you look at clubs like Valencia, Athletic, Bilbao, Atletico, they've got far more TV money than they did last year. The leap in TV revenue proportionally is not as great for Real Madrid or Barcelona as it is for those clubs who are on that sort of second strata. So it could be interesting.
Yeah, plenty of leagues are trying their best. And the money in China and whatnot is, of course, coming into focus. But like you say, the big five are the big five. You will have made one of our co-presenters, Tom, very happy because he's our Spanish guy, and he keeps telling us every week how La Liga is the best league in the world, and we keep fighting him, but we never win. So you have made him a very happy man. You mentioned your show with that you co-host duties with Nat Coombs on TalkSport 2. You do the European Football Show.
Sorry, I'm always advertising.
Oh no, you carry on. I'm gonna wag the finger at you here though, and I'm gonna say I first heard the European Football Show it's probably about 3 months ago-ish, and I sat there and listened to it, and I went, this is really annoying because somebody better than us has done the same idea we're doing. I got really annoyed. But no, joking aside, it's a fantastic show, and
Thank you.
when we started this podcast, obviously we had a very similar vision to what you do now. How did it come about, and have you got anything sort of planned to expand beyond what you already do, or are you just happy with the 2 hours every week that you can put together?
We got asked to do it. I guess I'm trying to think. Probably about 10 months ago, ahead of TalkSport 2 starting, and I knew Nat from working with him before on television. In fact, the first time we worked together, it was me, him, and Steve McLaren. And if that's not a great omen, I don't know what is. Unfortunately, Mac has not found his way back to us, but we live in hope. The door's always open, Steve. It felt quite a natural fit, and we've been lucky because we've had, I think, probably greater creative control than a lot of people on commercial stations do. We get allowed to figure out what we think's important to discuss. Of course, we want to discuss and acknowledge the biggest teams across Europe all the time, like Paris Saint-Germain, Real Madrid, and Atletico, and all the rest of it. But at the same time, we want to get into the nooks and crannies a little bit and try and cover stuff that's maybe not widely covered elsewhere. So we've been really lucky with guests, people who've been very good at giving us their time. We've spoken to some really interesting people, which has been great. And 2 hours feels quite nice. It stops it getting flabby, but there's always an awful lot to smash into 2 hours. It's this tight, and we do end up sacrificing some stuff on various weeks. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how we can grow it and expand it over the next little while. Nat and I are lucky to have a very good producer in Matt Gubbins, who's bright and lively and willing to try out new things as well as trust in us with where we want to take it. So onwards and upwards, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely encourage people to listen to it. We'll chuck some links out to where you can find that in a moment. And as you say, the 2 hours is perfect. It gets me through a Friday at work. In fact, I'm always gutted if I get up and it's not been downloaded into my iTunes yet. So I have to kind of go into work and pretend I'm not listening on my headphones. But it gets me through the afternoon.
A nice bit of Kris Rea, otherwise, I reckon.
Oh well, as a man who's a Metallica fan, I'm not sure Kris Rea will work for me, I'm afraid. But the thoughts there, and we will actually. I will give you an opportunity to plug the playlist you do in a minute, because that's something we'll have to bring up.
Yes.
Before we do close off the interview, I do want to ask you just for your sort of thoughts on the future of football as a whole, which I appreciate is a large question, but I specifically want to get your thoughts on the things like the growing social media platforms, clubs becoming global brands, if I put my teeth in, and the money that's coming into the various leagues. What are your views on how the game is changing and indeed the future of football as we know it as fans?
Well, social media is very interesting, as you say, because it's changing. It's going to change to an extent the way that clubs present themselves, and it already has. I mean, I think the clubs that come off best on Twitter and Facebook are the ones that do have an individual voice, that aren't sort of robotic and humorless. And I think clubs like Dortmund, their English Twitter feed is fantastic. It's really well done. Zenit St. Petersburg are another one who've got great English language Twitter feed that has a real personality, and I think people respond to that. I realise that clubs have to be cheerleaders for themselves to a certain extent, but I think to interact with the world around, and loosen the tie a little bit's quite nice. And it's good for. I know we've seen various hiccups that have obviously made it difficult, especially I guess for club press offices. But the fact that players do have that direct line now to fans, the players who can hit the right balance with that, I think do really well, and that will increase their popularity in years to come. So it is nice, I think, for fans to feel that players can be a little more human, rather than necessarily having someone write their tweets or just posting a picture of themselves having a cup of coffee or something like that. There are players out there with more imagination. I guess it's just a cross section of society, isn't it? It's a reflection of it's a reflection not just of footballers but of society of in general. Pardon me, of which they're representative. Of course, money does affect that, because it's clear that clubs feel there's a lot at stake. They feel that their image is something that's worth protecting. So some clubs, from a media perspective, can be quite hawkish. I would like to think that clubs and journalists and the public and the media can kind of meet in the middle at some point. But we'll have to see what happens. It's easy to forget, I think, sometimes how new social media is, how young it is, and how much opportunity there still is. There's plenty of space to grow. Tell me a bit more about your money in football question.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is you see that there's so many clubs. You talk about like RB Leipzig, for example, the money that's come into there. There's very mixed reviews on what people think of that. Of course, there's talk of them pumping money into an English club now, and you see the likes of Hoffenheim, who've been described as a plastic club, although they haven't had any success yet. That seems to be on the way with what Nagelsmann's doing there. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, like a club like PSG, who you'll know well, were always a large brand, if you will, but have now become a superpower because of the backing. They can never go a season, it seems, without a star player coming in. So I'm just sort of curious if you think that could potentially change the leagues as we know them. Will there ever be another Leicester City? Will there ever be another Blackburn Rovers? Or indeed, in other leagues, will we see a club like Montpellier, for example, win the French league? I mean, even that seems a million years away now. So do you think that's going to change how we see it with the money coming into these clubs?
Yeah, I think it's easy to feel doomy about the future when you talk about a few examples in isolation, and particularly when people feel that television owns scheduling, and the fact that the inconvenience to supporters is not always acknowledged. And let me assure you, for every English fan who feels that's rough, it's 10 times worse in Spain or France or Portugal. I remember Arsenal's kickoff against Leicester, I think it was last season, wasn't it, being rearranged at 6 weeks' notice, I think, for Valentine's Day, and loads of people complaining. And the reaction in Spain and France was, you got 6 weeks' notice and you got compensated. Are you kidding? That was absolutely incredible to people in continental Europe. So I don't think things are necessarily that bad. I do think as well, when we can talk about I guess Arsene Wenger's referred to it as financial doping, hasn't he, really? Money has always been in football. And, I think you hit the nail on the head, really, when you were talking about Hoffenheim, that money has been poured in before. I think the reason people in Germany have a problem with RB Leipzig is very different. It's a rebranding of an existing club. Hoffenheim have always been Hoffenheim. They were rubbish, and then they got a load of money poured in and became better. But cyclically, that sort of thing happens, doesn't it? And you talked there about Blackburn Rovers. Well, that was completely down to to one man's money, wasn't it?
So bad example of Jack Walker there.
Well, it's something that always happens, and I think it's interesting. You have a little scoot around Europe. Leicester aren't just Leicester. There are loads of Leicesters, and you hear it all the time. You hear Rostov being referred to as the Russian Leicester last season. You've got Nice this season. Who are just not the richest club in the French league, but a very well organised one that's had a plan unfolding over a number of years. I think, for me, the main reason why I believe that money is not the beginning and end of the conversation, or money in isolation is not the beginning and end of the conversation, and we have to accept the fact that teams and clubs in which get paid the most wages generally get it done long term. Give or take the odd QPR. I think you have to say that it is doable simply because. Sorry, I've completely lost the thread of what I was saying.
That's all right.
I'm just going to have a pause a second while I think about that. Oh my god! So thank goodness this never happens to me live, eh?
We're pulling back the curtain of reality. Andy is human, everybody. I suppose. I suppose, like the point you're making, I think is completely valid. It's the game. Football will always be football. I suppose that's the biggest cliche in the world. But it doesn't matter what club you support, how much money comes in. I mean, you could look at Chelsea and Manchester City and say, well, they are clubs that have been essentially, like you say, rebranded with the money that they've had. But yet there are teams that are competing with them this season. So I suppose there will always be competitive teams in every league, and you'll always get a surprise. I guess the worry fans have for lower league sides is can they ever be one of those big sides again? But you only have to look at the Championship in England and see how many huge sides there are down there. 2 former European Cup winning teams, for example, and I suppose that brings it home. But as long as we both agree that football will always go from one strength to another strength rather than die out into some kind of corporate entity with no fans.
I mean, you got to bear in mind that I'm an AFC Wimbledon fan, so I really believe that anything is possible, and I believe it because I've seen it. Yeah,
what a story as well. I mean, it's the perfect example, isn't it? Absolutely perfect example. So
yes, it's an incredible story. I'll see you at the 2026 Champions League final.
Well, that would mean Arsenal have to get. I'm not going to put any money on it yet as a long-suffering fan, but you never know.
Come as a neutral. Come as a neutral when we're beating Real Madrid. It'll be good.
Well, I should let in a piece of magic. I live in Plymouth, so you'll imagine who I was rooting for last season when Wimbledon played them. So
oh yeah, that was extraordinary. I mean, I never expected we would get promoted right up until the first point where I thought we might get promoted is when we scored with 12 minutes left of normal time. After that, I went from enjoying the day to being a bag of nerves. If Plymouth had actually put any pressure on Wimbledon in the last 10, 15 minutes, it would have been unbearable. But it was bad enough as it was. Yeah.
True. Very brief true story for you. I was speaking to another former guest of ours, Ali Beg, who you may or may not know, works for beIN Sports in Qatar now, and he's very close to Derek McInnes, the former Aberdeen the Aberdeen manager, who's also very good friends with Plymouth Argyle's manager, whose name completely escapes me now. Goodness me, how bad am I?
Derek Adams.
Derek Adams, thank you. He was saying that Ali was saying that he'd spoken to Derek Adams on the day of the game, and he said the emotions he got was exactly the same that Derek McInnes had said with his Aberdeen side, and he was saying that the two were exactly the same in that they were more nervous than he'd ever heard two professional managers. And Derek McInnes was talking about pre-season training, and yet Derek Adams was talking about potentially getting promoted. And he said, like, the managers, you don't see this side to them. You don't see it reported in the media about how nervous these managers get and how much their futures ride on it. And Argyle have gone from strength to strength this season, but it could have been oh so different because the town or the city was on its knees after that result last year. So it's amazing how a manager can can almost revitalise himself and go again. It really makes you see things, doesn't it? It really does. But good luck.
Yeah, I think you can sometimes see all the pain that goes in. If you watch Neil Ardley on the touchline, you can almost literally see him aging as the game goes on. He's a warrior. He's a definite warrior, and he's done an unbelievable job. But sometimes I just really feel for him, above and beyond like wanting him to do a good job and my team to win. I just you just want to give him a hug sometimes.
Even managing as I do at Sunday League level, that's enough for me. The stress of that is enough for me. I'll stick to that, I think.
I've not even gone that far.
Oh, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's great when you win, but Christ, it really is tough. Our final question is just in regards. We ask this to all of our guests. A footballing hipster player that they love for both the modern era and bygone eras. So you've mentioned a couple already, so you can use those again if you like. Or is there somebody you love particularly playing now or previously that you want to highlight?
My from yesteryear, it has to be my first favourite footballer, I think, Andy Thorne, who played for Wimbledon, Crystal Palace, ended up managing Hearts, Coventry, Kidderminster. What a player! Of course, very famous for that foul that got Peter Beardsley's goal disallowed in the 1988 FA Cup final. He was quite cynical, but very, very poised. Read the game brilliantly. Came back for a second spell at Wimbledon and was absolutely fantastic the second time as well. It didn't quite make me want to become a centre half as a footballer when I was a kid. Not that I really desperately wanted to be a professional footballer anyway, unlike a lot of other small kids. But yeah, I think he's almost too hipster, isn't he? I mean, a lot of people listening won't realise who he is. But yeah, I guess he was a real favourite for me. I don't know. In the more modern context, I have to say I've taken a lot of pleasure from the rise of Antoine Griezmann because I interviewed him yonks ago when he played for Real Sociedad, and I remember him saying that what a big deal it was to go back to Lyon in the Champions League, because I think it was just before they went there in a Champions League playoff game, Real Sociedad, and all his family were going to be there. Lyon had sacked him off when he was 14 because they thought he was too little. He was still a winger at that time, and it was just that season that he got moved from the left to the right, so he had a bit of a freer role. This was way before he became a centre forward, but they went back. He went back. Real Sociedad went there and won 2-0 against Rémi Garde's Lyon, and Griezmann opened the scoring with just a spectacular bicycle kick. It's a great goal. If you haven't seen it, YouTube it. Griezmann, Real Sociedad, Lyon, and he was obviously so pleased. It meant so much to him and his family. He used to go as a fan and stuff like that to see Lyon. It broke his heart when they didn't pick him up. And what he's become after going abroad just because he couldn't get a French club to take him when he was 15, and just building his life there, and what he's turned into. Seeing him firsthand during the Euros for France, doing such a brilliant job. He's one of the mentally toughest footballers out there. I think the way he reacts to disappointment. So if you go all the way back to when he was 15, and he couldn't get a deal in France, so he had to go to Spain. The fact that he's starting in the second division, that he's changed position, that he's coped with Simeone's tough love, the fact that he can miss a penalty in the Champions League final and then go on and have a great Euro and continue to be great this season. There's so much to like about him, but the way he's developed as a player, I don't think anyone could have predicted that at the beginning. Even if he looked good at the beginning, what he is now is extraordinary.
Brilliant answer. Love that. Yeah, he's a man who follows French football. I follow the French national team quite closely, and like you've watched him come through. I remember him when he was playing with Zoratouza at Sociedad, and and I always thought sort of Sousa was the sort of the more natural player at the time. But how I was wrong. He's developed into a wonderful player. So that's a great answer. What we'll do now is, before we let you go, give you an opportunity just to plug anything you want to mention. Obviously, let our listeners know where they can find you on all the social medias, as they say, and indeed where they can download the EFS show, and anything else that you want to plug. Feel free to mention your book again as well.
I will. I'm at Andy Brassell. That's got 2 S's and 2 L's, as I'm always forced to underline. I've spelt my surname like 1 million times in my life, child and adult, so I'm not going to stop here. Yeah, you can hit me up on that. I post links to all my stuff there. So that includes stuff I write for Who Scored, Bleacher Report, even a bit of Premier League for Betfair, and all sorts of other outlets. There'll be the radio stuff on there, TV stuff. Every Thursday we're on TalkSport 2 at 10 p.m, the European Football Show. And like I said, we get amongst it, me and Nat Coombs, all sorts of stories from all across the continent. So the biggies and all the rest too.
Superb. And with regards to your book, which is still available, it might have been written in 2006, but it's still very much relevant. And that is called All or Nothing: A Season in the Life of the Champions League. Is it Amazon the best place to recommend, or is there some way you get a bit more money if somebody goes somewhere else for it?
No, I think Amazon's the one. Yeah, I think so.
Good stuff. And we will post some links on our Twitter feed for people to follow that. And definitely, I'm over. I think it's time you wrote another book, Andy. So as if you are busy enough, get on another book, please. Listen,
right, noted.
Thank you. No pressure, though. No pressure.
I'm one of those people who welcomes feedback. So thank you.
Good, no worries at all. We will wrap it there, but I want to thank you for your time. You've gone above and beyond the Call of Duty. I've got far more time than I expected with you, so I really, really appreciate that tonight. And yeah, we'll hope our listeners enjoy this, and we thank you once again for your time. Really, really is a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And as we say on this podcast, keep your beers strong and your glasses trendy. You've been listening to the Football Hipsters podcast. Our thanks to Andy, as usual. You can follow us at the FH Pod, at the FH Podcast, I should say. Get our address right. And of course, you can find our information on our website and on SoundCloud, iTunes, and all the other podcatchers. So keep it tuned. Thanks to Andy again, and we'll speak to you all very soon.